It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Clara, her large eyes sparkling with childish curiosity, sat on the floral rug in the living room, a doll clutched in her hands. Adam Lucy was making tea in the kitchen, the old radio softly playing songs that smelled of memory. The aroma of cinnamon mingled with the sound of the kettle and the gentle breeze drifting in through the slightly open window. Without warning, with the same naturalness as asking why the sky is blue, Clara looked at me and posed the question that landed like a cold, sharp blow to my already weary heart. "Grandma, why does Mommy say you should be dead already?" For a moment, time stopped. The kettle whistled in the background, but I didn't hear it. My eyes fixed on my granddaughter with a pain I couldn't contain. What should have been just another afternoon of playtime transformed into a confrontation with ghosts of the past. My hands trembled as I held the white porcelain teacup, the same one my mother used to serve tea on Sundays, and I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. The innocence of that 6-year-old child had just handed me, unknowingly, the sharpest dagger anyone could plunge into my heart. I slowly sat down in the blue velvet armchair, the one that had been my refuge on so many sleepless nights, and looked at Clara. Her brown hair fell in curls over her shoulders, just like Isabel's when she was the same age. The same Isabel, who now 32, wished for my death with a coldness that cut deeper than any blade. How did we get here? How can a daughter wish for her own mother's death, and how can such a pure child repeat such venomous words without understanding their weight? Clara continued playing with her doll, oblivious to the tears silently streaming down my wrinkled face. For her, that question was just another one of many she asked every day. For me, it was the final confrontation with a truth I had tried to bury for 3 decades. I closed my eyes and let the memories take me back to the beginning, when I was only 17 and carrying Isabel in my womb. It was 1991, and I lived in a wooden shack on the outskirts of town, without running water, without electricity, only with the company of a man who beat me every night when he came home drunk from work. Joaquin didn't want that child. He said that another mouth to feed would be our complete ruin. I remember the nights I lay on the cold floor, hungry, caressing my belly, and promising the baby growing inside me that everything would be all right. Lies I told to both of us, because I knew I couldn't raise a child in that hell. I worked scavenging recyclable trash on the streets, earning pennies a day, while Joaquin spent everything on liquor and gambling. When Isabel was born, on a rainy March morning, I held her in my arms and felt a love so intense I thought my chest would explode. She was small, delicate, with the same large eyes that Clara has today. But love doesn't pay bills, it doesn't put food on the table, it doesn't ward off the dangers of a violent man who saw that child as a burden. For 3 months I fought like a lioness to keep her with me. I woke up before dawn to work, left her with an elderly neighbor who pitied our situation, came home exhausted, and still had to face Joaquin's screams and punches. He said that if I didn't get rid of that thing, he would take care of it himself. The threats were explicit, chilling, accompanied by looks that made me tremble with terror. That's when my distant cousin, Helen, appeared like an angel. She and her husband couldn't have children, and had a comfortable life in the capital. They offered to take care of Isabel temporarily, until I could get back on my feet. "It's just for a while, Lucy," she said, holding my hands affectionately. "When you're better, you can get her back." I handed over my daughter one June morning, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Isabel cried in Helen's arms, and I cried along, promising I would return soon. But life has a cruel way of turning promises into lies. Joaquin disappeared shortly after, taking the few belongings we had, and I was completely alone, working even harder to try to save enough money to get my daughter back. For years, I sent letters, calls, small amounts of money to Isabel. Helen sent me pictures of her growing up, school reports, drawings she made. But as the years passed and my financial situation remained precarious, the visits became more infrequent. Helen began to hint that Isabel was adapting well, that she called me aunt and considered Helen her real mother. What I didn't know was that, to protect Isabel from the pain of abandonment, Helen had constructed a different narrative. She told her that I had rejected her, that I didn't want her, that I had given her away, because I didn't care about her. It was easier to paint me as the villain than to explain to a child the complexities of poverty, domestic violence, and the desperation of a teenage mother. When Isabel turned 15, I finally achieved enough financial stability to try to resume our relationship. I worked as a cleaner in 3 different houses, had rented a small apartment, and dreamed of having my daughter back. But when I found her, she was no longer the baby I had given away. She was a rebellious teenager, her eyes full of resentment and a version of the story that made me the monster of her childhood. "Why did you come?" she asked, in that first meeting, with a coldness that cut me like a razor. "You didn't want me when I was a baby, why do you want me now?" I tried to explain, I tried to tell the truth, but her wounds were too deep, too infected by the poison of resentment, cultivated over years. To Isabel, I was the mother who had abandoned her out of selfishness, not the woman who had made the most agonizing choice of her life to protect her. Over the following years, our encounters were tense, fraught with accusations and misunderstandings. Isabel married young, had Clara, and built a life where I existed only as the bitter memory of an abandonment. She allowed me to see my granddaughter, but always under supervision, always with cutting remarks about how I didn't deserve that chance. And now, at 73, with a weary heart and trembling hands, I heard from my own granddaughter that her mother wished for my death. As if I hadn't already paid dearly enough for trying to save my daughter's life by removing her from an environment where she could have died of starvation, violence, or neglect. Clara continued playing, humming a children's song she'd learned at school, completely oblivious to the emotional storm she had unleashed. I slowly rose and went to the bedroom, where I kept in an old shoebox all the records of a story no one wanted to hear. Letters I wrote to Isabel for years, photos Helen sent me, newspaper clippings about jobs I got, certificates of courses I took trying to improve my life, all to one day prove that I never abandoned her out of disaffection, but out of love. It was at that moment that an idea began to germinate in my tired mind. If Isabel had poisoned her own daughter against me, perhaps it was time for Clara to know the truth. Not through confrontations or arguments, but through a silent legacy, a documented version of the facts that she could discover when she was mature enough to understand. I began meticulously organizing each document, each photo, each letter. I bought a simple recorder and began narrating my version of the story, my choked voice recounting to a cassette tape the secrets I had kept for decades. I told about the nights I cried from missing her, about the jobs I lost because I spent all my time thinking about her, about the men who left because I talked too much about the daughter I had lost. For weeks I worked on this secret project. Clara would come to visit me every afternoon, and I took advantage of each moment to record our interaction, her innocent questions, her crystalline laughter, as a way to show her, in the future, how close we were despite Isabel's efforts to separate us. But secrets, however well guarded, have a peculiar way of coming to light. Isabel discovered my project in the worst possible way. Clara, in her innocence, commented on the book Grandma was making about the family. Isabel was furious, interpreting my initiative as an attempt to manipulate her daughter against her. The confrontation took place on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Isabel arrived at my house like a hurricane, her eyes red with anger and her hands trembling with indignation. Clara was at school, so we were alone for what would be our most honest conversation in decades. "How dare you," she yelled, throwing on the table the tapes she had found in Clara's room. "How dare you try to turn my daughter against me with your lies?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time in 30 years, I decided not to be silent. "They're not lies, Isabel. It's the truth you never wanted to hear. Your truth is that you abandoned me when I was 3 months old. Your truth is that you chose your life instead of your daughter." "My truth," I replied with a calmness that surprised me, "is that I chose your life instead of mine. Do you think it was easy to give up my baby? Do you think I slept well a single night since then?" I showed her the letters I wrote, the jobs I got, the sacrifices I made. I showed her the pictures of her that I always carried with me, the drawings she made at school that Helen sent me, the prayers I wrote on scraps of paper, asking God to protect her. I was 17, Isabel. 17 years old, with no family, no money, with a man who beat me every night and threatened to hurt you? Did you want me to let you starve to death just to satisfy my selfish maternal instincts? Did you want me to watch you grow up amidst violence just to say that I never abandoned you? Do you understand that the most important stories are the ones no one wants to tell, and few have the courage to hear? It is these narratives, laden with uncomfortable truths and impossible loves, that need to be shared so that other families don't lose entire decades fueling misunderstandings. Subscribe to our channel to continue following stories like this, because every untold story is a life lesson that can transform not only the one who lives it, but those who have the sensitivity to listen. The following months were a time of rebuilding. Isabel started bringing Clara to visit me more often, and gradually, our relationship healed. It wasn't easy. Decades-old wounds don't close overnight, but for the first time, we were willing to listen to each other, without judgment, without accusations, without the need to be right. Clara, in her childlike wisdom, became the bridge between us. Her innocent questions forced us to be honest with each other, her laughter reminded us of what truly mattered, her unconditional love showed us that forgiveness is possible when there's a willingness to understand. One Sunday in December, almost a year after that devastating question about why Isabel wished for my death, Clara asked me another question that definitively changed the course of our story. "Grandma, now that I know you love Mommy very much, can I call you Grandma from the heart?" I held her small hands in mine, looked into her bright eyes that reflected all the innocence in the world, and replied, "My dear, I've always been your grandma from the heart. I was just waiting for you to find out." Isabel, who was watching the scene from the kitchen, approached and for the first time in over 30 years, hugged me like a daughter hugs a mother. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for saving me, even though I didn't understand it before." At that moment, I understood that I had learned the most important lesson of my life. True love doesn't seek to be understood immediately. It plants seeds in the hope that one day, in the right time, they will sprout and flourish. A mother's love can wait decades for a hug, years for a word of recognition, a lifetime for a whispered thank you. From that afternoon on, our family dynamic changed completely. Isabel started including me in important decisions about. For a moment, I saw something different in Isabel's eyes, a crack in the armor of anger she had built over the years. But the wound was too old, too deep to be healed in a single conversation. "You should have fought harder," she mumbled, already less convinced. "Other mothers manage. Other mothers have support, Isabel. Other mothers don't get beaten every day. Other mothers don't see their children as targets of the violence of uncontrolled men." I did what I could with what I had. And what I had was only love, a love so great that it was able to give up my own happiness to ensure that you had a chance. Tears began to stream down Isabel's eyes, and for a moment, she was again that 3-month-old baby I had held for the last time over 3 decades ago. She reached out hesitantly and touched one of the yellowed letters where I had written to my daughter Isabel, whom I carry in my heart every day. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" she asked. Her voice choked. "Because you never wanted to hear it. Because every time I tried to explain, you cut me off, accused me, called me a liar. Because Helen built a version of the story that was easier to accept than the complex and painful truth." Over the next few hours, we talked like we'd never talked before. I told her about the nights I walked the streets just to be near the house where she lived, about the jobs I took near her school just to see her pass by, about the Christmases I spent alone, saving presents I could never give. Isabel, in turn, spoke about the feeling of abandonment she'd carried since childhood, about how rejected she felt every time someone commented that she looked more like Helen than me, about how she'd built up anger as a defense mechanism against the pain. When Clara came home from school that afternoon, she found her mother and grandmother sitting side by side on the couch, paging through a photo album together that documented a love story built in distance and silence. "Grandma," Clara asked, with her usual curiosity, "why are you both crying?" Isabel looked at me, then at her daughter, and for the first time in decades, I saw pride in her eyes as she introduced me. "Because Grandma told me a very beautiful story about when I was a baby." That night, after Isabel and Clara left, I sat alone in the blue armchair and reflected on the transformative power of truth. For 30 years, I had carried the weight of guilt and silent judgment. For 30 years, Isabel had carried the weight of abandonment and rejection. And all because no one had had the courage to sit down and hear the full story. I took the cassette tape, where I had recorded my narrative, and played it. My voice, choked with emotion, recounted to an invisible audience the details of a journey that had transformed a scared teenager into a woman who learned that true love, sometimes, demands sacrifices only a mother is capable of making. And if you've come this far, following this painful but transformative journey, it's because you understand that the most important stories are the ones no one wants to tell, and few have the courage to hear. It is these narratives, laden with uncomfortable truths and impossible loves, that need to be shared so that other families don't lose entire decades fueling misunderstandings. Subscribe to our channel to continue following stories like this, because every untold story is a life lesson that can transform not only the one who lives it, but those who have the sensitivity to listen. The following months were a time of rebuilding. Isabel started bringing Clara to visit me more often, and gradually, our relationship healed. It wasn't easy. Decades-old wounds don't close overnight, but for the first time, we were willing to listen to each other, without judgment, without accusations, without the need to be right. Clara, in her childlike wisdom, became the bridge between us. Her innocent questions forced us to be honest with each other, her laughter reminded us of what truly mattered, her unconditional love showed us that forgiveness is possible when there's a willingness to understand. One Sunday in December, almost a year after that devastating question about why Isabel wished for my death, Clara asked me another question that definitively changed the course of our story. "Grandma, now that I know you love Mommy very much, can I call you Grandma from the heart?" I held her small hands in mine, looked into her bright eyes that reflected all the innocence in the world, and replied, "My dear, I've always been your grandma from the heart. I was just waiting for you to find out." Isabel, who was watching the scene from the kitchen, approached and for the first time in over 30 years, hugged me like a daughter hugs a mother. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for saving me, even though I didn't understand it before." At that moment, I understood that I had learned the most important lesson of my life. True love doesn't seek to be understood immediately. It plants seeds in the hope that one day, in the right time, they will sprout and flourish. A mother's love can wait decades for a hug, years for a word of recognition, a lifetime for a whispered thank you. From that afternoon on, our family dynamic changed completely. Isabel started including me in important decisions about Clara, consulted me on educational matters, and asked for my advice on motherhood. Clara started sleeping at my house on weekends, and together we cooked, watched old movies, and she helped me organize photographs into albums that told our story of love, separation, and reunion. I discovered that being a grandmother was even more rewarding than I had imagined. Each smile from Clara, each "I love you, Grandma," whispered before bed, each drawing she made of our family, now always including the three of us together, was a confirmation that it's worth waiting for the right time for things. Isabel, in turn, began to understand the complexity of the choices we make as mothers. When Clara entered adolescence and began to question some of her decisions, she would seek me out to talk about the challenges of balancing love and discipline, protection and freedom. "Now I understand," she told me in one of these conversations, "how difficult it must have been for you to make that decision. I can hardly imagine having to give Clara to someone else to raise, even knowing it would be better for her." It was comforting to see that Isabel had developed empathy for the scared teenager I once was, that she had understood that mothers are neither heroines nor villains, but simply women doing the best they can with the circumstances life presents them. Over the years, our story became an example for other families experiencing similar situations. Isabel began volunteering at an organization that supported teenage mothers, helping them find alternatives to their situations without judgment or pressure. She always said she wanted to prevent other families from spending decades separated by misunderstandings. Clara grew up knowing the whole truth of our story, understanding that families are built in different ways, but that true love always finds its way home. She became an empathetic young woman who doesn't judge people by appearances, who knows that every story has multiple versions, and that the truth usually lies somewhere in between. Today, at 80 years old, Looking back and reviewing this journey, I feel a profound peace in my heart. I've learned that time has its own wisdom, that the most intense pains can transform into the most valuable lessons, that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves more than to the people who hurt us. The question Clara asked that Sunday, "Why does mommy say you should have died already?" became the catalyst for our family's healing. If she hadn't had the innocent courage to voice that cruelty, we might have missed the opportunity to reconnect before it was too late. Now, when Clara brings her own children to visit me, she tells them the story of the great-grandmother who loved her daughter so much that she was able to give her up for others to raise, patiently waiting for 30 years for that love to be understood and reciprocated. She teaches them that true love sometimes takes forms we don't immediately understand, but that it's always worth giving people the opportunity to explain their choices. With each passing generation, our story gains new chapters, but the essence remains the same. A mother's love is unbreakable, capable of surviving decades of separation, misunderstandings, and pain. It's a love that doesn't give up, that doesn't tire, that patiently waits for its moment to be recognized. And the greatest lesson I've learned, and which I hope to leave as a legacy for my family, is that it's never too late to hear the complete version of a story. That it's never too late to apologize, to forgive, to start over. That families are not defined only by blood ties, but by the willingness to love unconditionally, to understand without judging, to accept that we all do the best we can with what we have. Today, when I hear Clara calling Grandma in her sweet, cheerful voice, when I see Isabel looking at me with pride and gratitude, when I feel the arms of my great-grandchildren embracing me with affection, I know that every tear shed, every sleepless night, every moment of longing was worth it. Because true love always finds its way home. Always.